So whenever I had to speak English in front of native speakers, I became very quiet. Even though I knew what to say, I was afraid. I was afraid that they would judge me. I was afraid that they would say that, oh, I don't understand.
Do you sometimes feel like your English isn't good enough to publish in high-impact journals in your field? Many non-native speaker researchers feel like this because, frankly speaking, expressing your research ideas in a precise, concise, scientific manner to publish in those best journals, it's tough. But what if you could turn this into an advantage? Well, in this episode of the Published Researcher podcast, our guest, Cathy Wong, will show you exactly how she's published papers in top journals in her field, teaching English, and how she's become the go-to authority in her field as well. Even though English isn't her first language, and even though she was actually scared to speak in English when she first came to the US. Despite this, she's now a full professor of TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages at Monmouth University in New Jersey, the US. And her 2023 paper received the Research Output Prize from the University of Hong Kong. So in this episode of the Published Researcher podcast, Cathy Wong will reveal the biggest language learning myth that might be stopping you from truly expressing your research ideas in the best way you could to publish in those top journals, so that you can feel more confident as a non-native speaker researcher and know exactly how you can become a published researcher too. Before this episode starts, I wanted to ask you a little favor. Did you know that 83.7% of all of you who watch and listen to these episodes regularly do not subscribe? So if you've enjoyed one of these episodes, please do me a favor and subscribe. It actually helps much more than you might think. Because the bigger this channel gets, the bigger the guests that we invite will get, and the bigger and better the tips for publishing research papers will also get. So you will help yourself, everybody else listening, and this channel by hitting the subscribe button. So without further ado, my name is Marek Kiczkowiak. This is Published Researcher podcast. Enjoy today's episode.
Okay, so the first question that I like to ask on this Published Researcher podcast is, how did you become published researcher? Because I suppose a lot of people that are listening to us, they either want to publish their first paper or maybe they want to publish more papers, right? So what was that journey like for you, and how did you become a published researcher and publish your papers?
Well, first of all, research or publication is actually part of the requirement of my job. So I could start from how I started and my relationship with writing. So as a grad student and even in my early career, I did not have a positive relationship with writing or with research because, many of us, nobody taught us how to actually write a research paper successfully. So I still published, I still did my research, but I did not enjoy the process. So every time I just dragged my feet to write, to think of a topic, for data collection. So I didn't know how, but I've always wanted to make an impact in the field or in the world. And so I was like, okay, if this is really my goal, I really have to love it. I really want to make an impact. And so I realized that one way for us to make an impact is through writing. And so I took an initiative to look for different professional development workshops to help myself to, and hopefully, I didn't know if it would work for me, but I was hoping that by joining different professional development workshops, it would help me to become a better researcher, and hopefully I can publish more papers and to publish paper in high impact journals. So I found, I talked to my former dean to see, because I didn't know if first of all I didn't know if it would work, right? So I didn't want to just use my hard-earned money to pay for something that I wasn't sure about. So I reached out to my former dean And as soon as I asked him if he would be able to support me in my very first professional development workshop, he said yes right away. He had that trust. He told me that he enjoys supporting faculty members. So, and that the very first professional development workshop really helped me find time to write, to establish my goal as a researcher, as a scholar. So I was able to find time to really sit down and to write. And then during my writing time, and I was like, okay, now I have the schedule. I'm willing to write. And I started to have the positive relationship with writing. But how am I going to write effectively? Because, I'm sitting down. I want to be able to use my time efficiently and to actually write good papers, publishable papers in high impact journals. And so I keep digging, I keep researching, and then I found your channel, I found your company, and so I was able to learn different methods, like a structured method to help me write papers, positively and with confidence as well.
Got it. And so you mentioned that you managed to find the time to write, but I guess a big question is like, how do you manage to do that? Because, you're a researcher, you've got to teach classes, you've got a family, so all sorts of things going on. And I think for a lot of researchers, also PhD students, actually finding that time to write is really difficult. So what did you do, or what are you doing now to have that writing space?
So that's a very good question. So at first it's challenging, but I think that having a clear plan and really write down, make an appointment with yourself. So, a lot of times people would schedule based on your teaching schedule. Oh, when they look at your calendar, oh, you're not teaching at this certain hour. So I'm going to schedule you and put myself in their calendar. And I'm like, wait, no, I really need to block the time. So I learned that, so I was like collecting data of myself to see when I would be able to focus. So I was like I spent about a week or so writing down, recording what I was doing and how I felt, at particular time. So right when I figured out that, let's say, between 10 and 12 o'clock, on the weekday would be my focus hours. So I was really able to think clearly during those 2 hours. So I make sure that if I don't have to, if there is nothing urgent, I will block myself and write on my calendar that these 2 hours are my writing hours. So, and I promised myself. So because I put it down on the calendar, I don't use electronic calendar. I use the traditional paper calendar. So I write down. So every time I look at it, okay, so this is the appointment that I have with myself, and I'm going to just focus. Put away the phone, because when I have my phone right next to me, I have the urge just to look at my phone, and I close my emails just to make sure that I'm not distracted during those 2 hours.
Love it. That's you use the word like appointment with yourself. And I really like that phrase, because I suppose if you had an appointment like this podcast, or you had an appointment with your PhD student or your supervisor, you wouldn't miss that appointment. You would add it into your calendar and you would do everything possible to show up to that appointment prepared. It should be the same with writing, but I guess a lot of us don't do it. And it sounds like such a simple strategy. So why do you think, I don't know, many people have problems like scheduling that writing time?
Well, I think that because, like teaching, if you don't show up, a lot of people will be affected. And also like when you are meeting with people, right? So if you don't show up, those people will be waiting for you. But with writing, it's just an appointment with ourselves, right? And so it's very easy or natural for us to push that into the bottom of the list. I'm going to get to it, right? But if you make a priority, make a commitment with yourself saying that, okay, writing is very important in my career. or like if you have a goal to contribute to make an impact in the field or in the society, then you'll really make it a priority. I think this is more like a mindset. This is like a mindset. If we have a clear goal of what we want to achieve through writing, I think that it'll be easier for us to really like to make the commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. And you keep on using the word as well, impact, that you've wanted to make impact. And that's why writing is important, because it allows you to make that impact. It allows you to publish in really good journals. So tell us more about it. Like, well, what's the impact that you want to make, and why is that so important for you as a researcher?
Well, I am a teacher educator, right? So my goal, since, teaching has been my passion since I was 4 years old. I guess, well, how long do I go back? How long do you want me to go back? So
I don't know. You're the expert here. It's your impact. So,
right.
But I think that's really important, because, you said you've always wanted to be a teacher since you were 4 years old. So there's this like kind of desire to make an impact with your research on translanguaging, which we'll get into in a second. Does it go all the way back to kind of when you were a child?
Yeah. So I grew up in Hong Kong. My first language is Cantonese. And so I was learning English back home. I wanted to be able to speak English like fluently, like beautifully, but I just wasn't able to, no matter how hard I tried, in that environment. So I kept asking myself, okay, I want my teachers to teach me well, but then I felt like I wasn't learning well. So I asked myself this question. So if I become a teacher in the future, how would I teach? How would I help students who want to learn a different language, or in my case, English? So, and that's how I started to want to become not just a teacher, but effective teacher, right? And so I kept having this goal. And so in the university, I selected TESOL, Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages, as my major. And so I continued. In grad school, I studied applied linguistics, because besides English, I wanted to teach Chinese as well. So I selected applied linguistics to be my focus in my master's degree. And I wanted to keep going. I'm like, okay, I was, because in my master's degree program, I was able to actually teach Chinese, and I loved it. I really, really loved it. So I wanted to be able to teach in a higher ed setting. And I was thinking, like, how do I help more students? So I was thinking, if I am able to teach one teacher, that one teacher will be able to teach, or to be able to make an impact on different children's lives, right? So if I teach 20 teachers, and those 20 teachers will be able to help so many more students. And so that's how that's the kind of impact that I want to make. And now in the classroom, in my own classroom, there are so many students or so many teachers that I can help. But through writing, I realized that it can reach more people and teachers who want to help their students.
That's really powerful. I've never thought about it like that. But yeah, if you are a teacher educator, and as you said, you teach one teacher to improve, and then that teacher impacts, I don't know how many students does a teacher have in a year, right? Hundreds. That's a huge impact. So, you touched upon, being born and raised in Hong Kong, and I imagine it's a multilingual society. So is that where your interest in translanguaging comes in? And maybe you could also define for our listeners or viewers what translanguaging actually is, and does your interest in this particular research subject, does it come from growing up multilingual?
Okay, so first of all, let me explain what translanguaging is. It's a simple term, right? So translanguaging is a teaching approach where students are encouraged to use all of their communicative resources, including their home languages, to help them learn academic content and language skills. So meaning instead of sticking to just one language in the classroom, translanguaging allows students to utilize their full linguistic resources in the meaning making process. This can help them feel more comfortable and confident, making it easier for them to understand and express ideas. So it's the process. It's the process of teaching multilingual students by including their home languages rather than solely focusing on just one language, the partner language or the target language, right? So it is important for teachers to view students from an SS-based perspective. So I hope that I explained what translanguage.
Yeah. So just so I understand. So it's basically, let's say you're learning Cantonese and your first language is English. So are students in such a classroom allowed to kind of speak English basically and not necessarily use Cantonese? Is that kind of the idea?
Yes. That's correct. When I first introduced translanguaging to my pre-surface teachers or even in-surface teachers, I often ask them this question. So imagine yourself learning, let's say, a world language, like let's say French, in a French-speaking environment. And at the same time, you are learning content subject, let's say biology. So, and there are two teachers. The first teacher said that your home language, let's say English, is not allowed. And everything you read and everything that you have to express, that had to be in French. How would you feel? And then I would ask them, just because you're told not to use English, your first language, in the classroom, does it mean that you would stop thinking in English? So that's the first scenario I gave my students or the in-service teachers. And then I would give them the second scenario. You're still learning biology, and in the French-speaking environment, your teacher, who couldn't really speak English well, welcome you to make meaning, welcome you to draft your ideas in English, in your first language first. And then the teacher would look for different resources in your first language to help you learn. And then when you need to express your ideas in French, she would provide different scaffolding strategies like word banks and sentence stems to help you formulate your sentences. And then I'll ask them, which scenario do they want?
And what did they say?
What do you think? What would you say? Which scenario would you like?
I don't know. Well, I'm biased because
I know.
Because I understand your research and I do see the value of translanguages. So I'm completely biased to ask. But my guess would be that a lot of, like, especially maybe monolingual people or people who have not been exposed that much to learning several languages, they might think that it's better to maximize the time that you speak, the language you're trying to learn, rather than switch, allow people to speak in their home language, because then, they'll be constantly switching and they won't learn the target language. So therefore, we should never speak in the mother tongue. We should just speak in the first language. I imagine that might be the reaction of many people, but I'm curious, what did they say?
So far, all of my students or in-service teachers picked scenario 2 because they were thinking from their own identity. So they felt like if the teachers restrict them from speaking their first language or didn't allow them to use their first language, English, to think or to express themselves, in a way, it's telling them that I'm rejecting you. I'm rejecting who you are. So they were thinking from that angle as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so is that the sort of the monolingual bias or the problem of monolingual approach to language teaching that you refer to in one of your papers?
Yes. So let me clarify, right? So a monolingual approach is using just one language in the classroom. And to me is problematic because it really restricts teachers and students from using other languages in teaching and learning process. And not allowing students to use what they already know is essentially rejecting who they are, right? So instead of connecting what they're learning to their background knowledge because, their first language, their home language, their identities is already their background knowledge. And so the monolingual approach really limits how students can express themselves and to make sense of the world.
Well, what do the students think of it? Because you mentioned your in-service teacher trainees, but what about the students in a classroom? How do they react to this approach where, they are allowed to use the first language, they can switch between the languages? And
if you're listening to this and thinking, I also want to publish more papers in better journals while working less, well, then we can show you a proven system to publishing 3 or more papers every single year without journal rejections. It will allow you to publish in top journals, make a real impact with your research, and become the go-to authority in your field. And I'm sharing the whole system with you for free. The link is right in the description. It's already helped hundreds of other PhD students and researchers. Jean-Paul Sebastian wrote 5 papers in 4 months. Cathy Wong published 2 papers in Q1 journals. Lisette Britz published 3 papers. 4 more are under review, and she's working on 4 more papers. And Lina Soros-Emilson got tenure. If you want similar results, if you want to publish in top Scopus-Indexed journals, then you can get the whole Publish Researcher system for free, and the link is right in the description.
are they generally happy or?
Yeah, so from the paper that you were referring to, so I actually interviewed 5 to 6 students from that one study. So I asked them, what did you think or how did you feel when your teacher allow you or invite, not just allow, but invite you, when your teachers invite you to use your other languages? Because from that group of students, besides English as their first language, some of them were able to speak Spanish and Cantonese and another language at home. So the teacher in the study, the teacher actually invited them to utilize really their entire linguistic repertoire in the meaning making process. So I asked the students how they felt about it. So all of them actually said that they were surprised in the beginning because before the study, they were told to use Chinese because that's the language that they were learning in school. So they were told not to use English, not to speak English. Everything had to be in Chinese. But then after confirming with the teacher that really, I can use English to ask questions. I can really use English to talk to my classmates about these questions. They were like, oh, this is so much better because it really helped them understand. They were learning advanced level academic subjects. And for that particular study, they were learning how to create advertisement. So there are different concepts that they had to understand before they can develop an advertisement for as a class project, right, or as a group project. So they had to understand that, and during the process, they were able to see different advertisements in their home language to really help them understand. Okay, so what makes an advertisement or commercial effective for audience? So they really enjoy that.
And so you mentioned that it seems like teachers are positive about it, students are positive, but is there any research that shows that such an approach to language teaching actually gives students better outcomes than the monolingual approach? I mean, we would have to, I suppose, define what we mean by an outcome, but just to keep matters simple, does it help students reach higher fluency faster if we adopt this kind of translanguaging approach?
That's a very good question. So right now, as of now, more research is needed on the long-term effect. But my own papers, my own research, along with my colleagues' studies, have found that students' academic knowledge and their language proficiency improved. But again, the long-term effect, we still need more study to confirm that or to explore that. So the students in my own papers, they were able to apply what they learned in their classes, their content classrooms, and they were able to include their targeted vocabulary and sentences in their formative assessment, informal assessment. Again, it's just based on the teacher's observations and the simple rubrics. More studies have to be done to examine students' long-term effects.
Oh. Is that something that you're currently working on, or what studies are you working on right now?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I've started to work on to examine how teachers actually integrate translanguaging in their assessment. Because when we talk about, okay, you can do this as your instruction, but, a lot of educators probably agree that your assessments need to reflect your teaching. So one of the challenges or one of the main common concern is that, okay, so I implement translanguaging in my classroom. How am I going to integrate that in the assessment? So right now I am exploring how teachers create translanguaging assessment. And right now that's my focus. And I think that there's a need for us to really see how teachers actually evaluate or use formal evaluations to assess students' learning.
Yeah, because I suppose that's the issue is that we often in assessment isn't the goal sort of, you mentioned when you were learning English to speak English, beautifully, fluently. And I think in a lot of people's minds, that means, I suppose, not switching between languages. I suppose that means imitating a monolingual native speaker. So how do you square that with the translanguaging approach?
Oh, that's a good question. Now, to be honest, when I was in Hong Kong, I did have that native speakerism mindset. I did have that. So, but when it comes to assessing language proficiency in a translanguaging approach, we move away from the typical native speakerism mindset, which can be seen as part of the monolingual ideology that I just talked about, right? So instead, we adopt an assess-based perspective. We need to appreciate the unique linguistic resources that each student brings into the classroom. Well, let's say here's the question. Let's say when we learn English, right? There's a common question. What is standard English anyways? It really depends on the people, the speakers, where they're from, who they're talking to. What is standard, right? What is standard English? Are we talking about American English? Are we talking about British English? And even in England, there are different types of English. So what is standard? And then we focus on how students use their diverse linguistic abilities to communicate and understand in real life situations rather than how closely they resemble a native speaker. So did I answer your question?
No, you think you did. And I mean, it opens a whole can of worms, but it is a very interesting question because, with languages such as English or the Spanish or, languages that are spoken by hundreds of millions of people, I suppose it's similar in Mandarin or Cantonese. There's just so many different varieties of that language, right? So what is the standard? And also I was thinking that, just by the very definition, I suppose somebody who's learning a second or a third language, the way they will communicate, the way these languages interact is just different from somebody who just speaks English, isn't it? So, I mean, comparing somebody like yourself who speaks two or maybe more languages, I don't know, to somebody who just speaks one language, English, and comparing your English to theirs is kind of strange. I mean, at the very least, your proficiency in English should be compared to somebody who also speaks English and maybe two other languages, right? Am I on the right track here?
Yes. So I also wanted to emphasize that when we talk about translanguaging, and I kept talking about utilizing students' full linguistic repertoire or utilizing students' communicative repertoire in the meaning-making process, right? So when we think about these states, language is not the only way that we use to communicate our ideas or our thoughts. People use drawing, people use music, emojis or different signs to, or bodily movement. When I talk, I use a lot of hands to focus on my points, right? So there's so many ways for students to express their ideas or to get meaning across. So I think that we should not limit ourselves or students to the native speakerism mindset, because the goal here is to encourage participation and engagement, not perfection.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna go there because that's gonna open another can of worms. But also perfection perhaps should not be tantamount to a monolingual English speaker, let's say, of standard British English, because that's not necessarily
right
perfection, right? Because again, it's kind of different, right? Like maybe the way you're using your linguistic resources, English, Cantonese, and any other languages you speak is perfect. But the way you use English might not be the same as somebody from New York who's monolingual, who's using it.
Yes. I'm glad that you brought this up. So very interesting. So when I first came to the United States, I was just learning English. When I was in Hong Kong, I thought that my English was already very good until I came here to the United States, and I became very quiet. Right? Because of that monolingual ideology or native speakerism mindset. So whenever I had to speak English in front of native speakers, I became very quiet. Even though I knew what to say, I was afraid. I was afraid that they would judge me. I was afraid that they would say that, oh, I don't understand. Like even right now, actually, when people ask me, can you say that again? Simply because they couldn't hear what I said, right? So they were trying to ask for clarification. But to me, I'm like, wait, is it because my English is bad and not good enough? That's why they ask me to repeat. So and that shouldn't happen. Being bilingualism and multilingualism is a beautiful thing, something that we should celebrate. And I think that this is my goal. This is the impact, going back to the impact question. This is the impact that I want to make. I want to normalize multilingualism in both education and society. So rather than just thinking that you speak English as a native speaker, and so you're in a higher position or more superior, and if you're learning English, then you're lacking something. So we should not really view people who are multilinguals or emergent multilinguals as deficit.
Yeah, we're actually the superior in so many ways. Like anybody who speaks more than one language, that's, in my mind at least, that's way better than just speaking one language, because that would be another podcast, but it opens up your mind to so many new ideas, in that language, words and concepts that don't exist in another language, a whole new culture, literature, peoples, and everything is just so beautiful. Yeah. So yeah, but I want to kind of maybe backtrack a little bit. And which of these papers that you've published are you most proud of?
Oh, this is a hard question. Most proud of? I think that there's one paper that I published in the ELT journal recently that I really, really like. So in that paper, I examine how an ESL teacher build a whole learning environment with her student through translanguaging, through the translanguaging approach. So I was able to observe her, and she could speak Spanish. She could speak a little bit of Spanish, but because of her strong stance or strong belief in translanguaging, she wanted to implement translanguaging in her classroom to help her students. And she did say that the school didn't allow teachers to use other languages to teach English, but because of her strong stance, she's like, okay, I need the students to feel proud of themselves. Because again, translanguaging is also about students' identity, right? So from that observation, I could see that she included, like, rather than positioning herself that she's the teacher. Well, she's the teacher, but she didn't let her students think that, okay, you will learn from me only. But rather, she created a co-learning environment where she learned from her students, right? So again, she could speak a little bit of Spanish, but then she would invite students to teach her Spanish. And also in the process, the students who were able to speak some Spanish, but not a lot, they would go to their Spanish-speaking peers to ask them, oh, how would you say that in Spanish? And the teacher was not scared to say that, oh, I don't know. Let's find out together. And so there is one word that I don't remember which word. Is it a sheep or goat? So she was confused about how to say a sheep and a goat in Spanish. And some students say, I don't remember the word in Spanish, but some students say
sheep, it's oveja.
Oh, oveja, and then the cordero, right?
Cordero is the meat, actually. I forgot what's the word for.
Yeah. So the students were confused also. So, all right, let's find out. So right away, the students, as she went to the bilingual dictionary, and then the students gathered together to look for the word. And from then on, everybody got a confirmation. This word is sheep and this word is a goat. And together, using that knowledge together, they co-created a bilingual poem. And it was beautiful. And that's the paper that I still think about, that I still share the result of this study with my current students. And even when I do professional development with in-service teachers, I share that story with the teachers because it's like amazing.
And I guess a question that maybe a lot of people listening to us have on their mind is, how do you get your papers to those high impact journals? You mentioned ELT journal, which, if you're teaching English, is one of the top journals. What do you do to get your papers, to have a chance even to get published in those Q1 Scopus-Indexed journals?
Well, first, something that I learned from you is that we really need to find a clear research gap. What is lacking? What do we need to find out, right? The research gap is very important. And then from the research gap, we need to think about the methodology. Methodology is very important. So you can find out what needs to be done, but if you don't have a rigorous methodology to collect data, for you to analyze the data that you collected, it's just hard to get your paper published in a high impact journal. And so I think that's why after I found out that, okay, I have the time to sit down, or I found some time to sit down to write, how am I going to make good use of the time that I have for myself to write a paper that I could submit to the high impact journal so that more people can read it?
Absolutely. So in terms of then choosing that gap and the methodology, how do you go about it, I suppose, to ensure that you've got something that you can possibly publish in those better journals?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that, you need to, the key is to find the gap, right? And then you need to find the right methodology to conduct your study. But how do you go about it? Or what's I suppose, your tip that you would give to somebody who wants to publish in a really good journal? They want to make an impact. How do they go about, let's say, finding that gap or finding that topic? What was it that you did?
First of all, it's through reading. So as we learn from elementary school, right? Writing and reading, they go hand in hand. And same thing when you're writing a research paper. You'll get ideas through reading different research papers. And another thing that I could find the gap is through my experience working with pre-surface teachers and in-surface teachers. And then I was able to link what is lacking from the literature and what I see that teachers really need, or what students really need in their classroom. So I linked it together and to create that the reasons why I'm doing this study, or to create a research agenda based on my reading and what I experienced as a teacher educator.
Yeah, I guess having that practical experience gives you a big advantage, right? Because also for myself, some of the best research ideas that I've had and the papers that got most citations were published in the best journals. They came out of obviously reading. Couldn't disagree with that. Lots of reading and kind of understanding what has been done and what hasn't been done. But for me, that spark, that creative spark, that really made, I suppose, that research idea special and different from so many other research ideas there, was often the practical experience. And just, for you being in the classroom, for me also, writing course books and just like observing what's happening and then connecting it to the literature that I've read. And then all of a sudden you have this eureka moment. You're like, yes, that's it. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So again, they're having that idea. What are you going to do with that idea? So that's why the research design is very important. I mean, I'm still learning, after all these years, I'm still learning because things change. And I mean, especially like right now, like terms change all the time, and there are different papers published every day, right? So how do you keep up with your reading, and how do you strengthen your research design? And so this is something that is, it never ends, something for us to improve on every day.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about, the lessons that you've learned from publishing papers, the successes, but have you had any setbacks, or what has been a big setback, I suppose, with research, publishing, and how did you try to overcome it?
Oh, okay. So that's a very good question. I actually asked myself a question like, what do I wish that I could have known when I was younger, right? So initially, in the very beginning, like I said, right, many of us were never taught to write an effective research paper. And so in the beginning, my research actually spanned across different areas, right? Because I didn't know, my interest has always been second language or a second language pedagogy, but that is so broad, right? So within this area, what is your focus, right? So I try to do research about interviewing ESL teachers, understanding their challenges, and I interview school leaders, understanding their needs, what their needs are, and how do you use this particular model to teach students. So they're very broad, which made it very difficult for me to establish myself as an expert in any specific area or topic. And because of this lack of focus, it affected my relationship with writing. And as I mentioned earlier, right, I often procrastinated because writing felt more like a burden than a joy or passion. And I also struggle because, like I said, I lacked a structured approach to writing, again, because I really wanted to make an impact. So I really wanted to overcome these challenges. And so I had to take a step back and narrow down my research interest to a more specific area that genuinely excite me. And so I was thinking about my experience. So when I sit down, when I need to write a paper, what makes me happy? What do I really want to find out? So I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about, I'm a mother of 2 young children. So I've always wanted to look for resources or find ways to develop their heritage language, which is Cantonese, my first language, and also Mandarin Chinese, right? So I kept seeking ways to help them. So, and that's why trans languaging came to me, and also reflecting myself. as a multilingual speaker in the United States in this particular context, what would excite me? So I found out that, Chinese language, it really speaks to me. And this refinement actually helped me gain deeper insights and build a solid foundation of knowledge. And so, and eventually I could position myself as a knowledgeable contributor in this area.
Yeah, I suppose finding your why is such a huge thing. It's so important to have this thing that that you're really passionate about, that you love, because it's not worth spending the next 20 years researching something just because it's going to give you more papers, right? But it's just you dislike it, or you're not even enjoying it. So yeah, that's very important. And so are you trying to raise your children and your family multilingually then?
Yes, that's my biggest mission right now. So a lot of the things that I do right now, and or the papers that I write, my children actually gave me a lot of inspiration. So sometimes, like when I'm reading literature or even textbooks, I come across some strategies, and I would try to apply to them. And then I would ask them, "How do you feel? What do you think?" May I share an example that I used on my son? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fascinated by it as well, because we have just one child, not two, but we're also trying to raise him bilingually, because my wife is a mother tongue Spanish speaker. I'm a mother tongue Polish speaker. So I want him to speak Polish. So yeah, go ahead. I'm very interested.
Yeah. So, we speak Cantonese at home. My children and I I speak Cantonese at home, and they often respond to me in English, and my husband speaks English, right? So I'm the only Cantonese speaker at home, but I really, really want them to learn. I think that because that's part of their identity. And we visit Hong Kong with family in Hong Kong, and we visit every year. So I really want them to have that, to build that relationship with my family back in Hong Kong. So, but at the same time, they're also learning Mandarin Chinese at school. So when my son was 7 years old in second grade, so his teacher asked the class to write a piece of writing, to write something about their experience in Halloween. They all love Halloween, but my son was very scared. And I remember he said, I don't know how to write my experience all in Chinese. I don't know, I can say some, but in terms of writing, I don't know, like he was really scared. And so I applied what I know about using different resources to help him compose the writing. So first I asked him, I said, okay, so you're able to tell me what happened on Halloween, what you did and what you ate, right? So he was telling me like his experience, like, I could see the smile. And then after that, I said, okay, now, are you able to say that in Chinese? So, and he's like, oh yes, I could. And the teacher actually gave them a word bank and some pictures. All right. Okay. So I want you to remember what you just told me. And now I want you to try to say it in Mandarin. And so, I recorded it and I said, okay, say it. And he was also looking at the word bank and he's like, oh, I'm able to say it. And I said, okay, now remember what you say, what you told yourself in Mandarin, you recorded it. If you don't remember what you said, you can listen to it. So, and he used his computer, started to type in the pinyin, the sound system, the pronunciation. So, he was still learning pinyin, but I helped him, of course, as we know from Vygotsky, right? You need someone to help you in the process to reach your potential. So I was helping him, but he was typing. He was able to compose that writing all by himself, actually. And if there are words that he didn't know, he would type in the pronunciation, and then the Word document would come up with the Chinese words, and he was able to copy that word from the Word document. So this example really showed me to affirm my belief in Chinese languaging. We utilize what students already know and make the connection instead of forcing them, okay, right away, I need you to compose a story all in Chinese when they're so new to the language.
And that's an excellent example. And it will probably stay with me as well as my son goes to school, and we're trying to raise him bilingual, because I'm also the only source of Polish. And, we're in Costa Rica, so everything is in Spanish. But I do want him to have that connection to Poland, to learn Polish. My parents and his grandparents don't speak any other languages. They just speak Polish. So it will be hugely important for him to learn that language.
Yeah.
But I want to move a little bit away from the discussion of like learning languages and come back just for a second to publishing papers, because you seem to have found, I suppose, a positive vehicle in trying to publish papers. It allows you to make an impact. You sound very passionate about it, but there is also this, well-known phrase, publish or perish. And that does seem to be a rat race to publish and publish and publish, and preferably, in the best journals possible. And if you want to advance in academia, you need to publish, perish, right? So what's your take on that? Isn't it similar to the rat race that we always complain about? I suppose, I don't know, in business, or, that you need to work more, or you need to generate more money. And here, you need to generate more papers. How do you feel about this?
Okay. So, I can definitely share how I feel or what I think about it, even though I know that we can't really change the reality right now. To me, I think that being able to publish your studies and to share the result and your perspectives with others is so important. To me, it's a collaborative process. It's a way for us to continue the conversations about a particular topic. However, right now, because of the pressure, being able to publish, and for some universities, or for a lot of universities, like people are required to publish in particular journals, right? So I think that if you ask me, I don't think that would. How should I phrase it? I try not to say anything negative that would offend anyone. But I think that really create a lot of pressure to people. And in the way, that kind of culture creates the academic greed, meaning they have something, but then they don't want to share because they want to get that out first, or they don't want people to, to take their ideas and make it their own. So yeah, that's the downside of, the rat race that you're referring to. That's just my perspective. Mm.
And I suppose it also creates fake publications, right? Just yesterday, I was talking to my wife, and she mentioned this story of, I think it's a dean at the University of Salamanca in Spain, which is, one of the oldest universities in Europe. And apparently, I don't know the exact details because she read the article, but she told me that there has been several fake publications where he had basically inflated his publication record to, I suppose, get that position. And now Springer is going to actually retract a lot of those publications. So, it does create that pressure to publish. Mm-hmm. Might also create that idea that, we just need to produce perfect papers, because if your paper doesn't produce any novel insights, well, then it's not going to be published in a good journal. But at the same time, there is some importance as well to papers, I suppose, that simply confirm what we already know, because we do need to repeat those studies. I mean, you've done a study with a certain group of students on one language, but we need to even just replicate the exact same process and the exact same study 100 times in 100 different settings until maybe we can draw really, far-reaching conclusions. But many journals are just simply not interested in publishing replications of studies, right?
Yeah. So, a lot of high impact journals, they want cutting edge. They want something that is new, yeah. So that kind of pressure, to me, sometimes it's not healthy. Yeah, especially for people who are still learning how to publish, how to write research papers effectively. And that pressure could lead some scholars to actually, I've heard stories like how people would pay others to write papers for them, or to look up other papers and then change a few things and make it their own. So so there are horrible stories like that.
Yeah. And it also negatively impacts science, because there's another aspect is that, negative results are basically unpublishable. Unless you get statistically significant results, let's say if you're doing quantitative research, having negative results isn't really publishable. But this leads to a situation where a lot of research is not published, and it just gathers dust on people's shelves because, the things that researcher did just showed that the method doesn't work, and they didn't get any results. They just got negative results. But that is a result, isn't it? That it just didn't work. Supposing you did a massive study on translanguaging, and then it just turns out that, that study just didn't work, or translanguaging doesn't work, or your method doesn't work, it wouldn't be publishable. But it's a good finding to have, because then if we know that this approach doesn't work, then other researchers can use something that works and not repeat the same mistakes, right?
Yes, exactly. And then, there's no one size fits all, right? So this theory may work in this situation, but not in other situation. It's just really for us to continue the conversation.
Is there anything supposed to end on a more positive note? Is there anything that you think we can do as a community, as individual researchers, to try to minimize that rat race or change it a little bit?
I think that first, having a community where people can talk about their work, and having that common interest or mutual interest about what we want to achieve by publishing paper is very important. Because, as researchers, we sit behind the computer, or we sit by the computer and just write. Sometimes the process can feel very lonely. If we have that community where people can write together and they can ask questions, and then they can, provide support for each other, I think that that's a good step to create that positive relationship with our own writing process.
Absolutely. And where can people find you, Cathy, if they're interested in finding a little bit more about your research papers, if they're interested in learning a bit more about translanguaging, maybe raising multilingual families as you do, how can people reach out to you?
So they can reach out to me via my email. It's CWONG@monmouth, MONMOUTH.edu, or I'm on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And we'll put those links as well in the description to the podcast. So if you have further questions about translanguaging, publishing papers, raising multilingual families, Cathy is the person to get in touch. Thanks a lot, Cathy. I enjoyed this conversation very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
If you're listening to this and thinking, I also want to publish more papers in better journals while working less, well, then we can show you a proven system to publishing 3 or more papers every single year without journal rejections. It will allow you to publish in top journals, make a real impact with your research, and become the go-to authority in your field. And I'm sharing the whole system with you for free. The link is right in the description. It's already helped hundreds of other PhD students and researchers. Jean-Paul Sebastian wrote 5 papers in 4 months. Cathy Wong published 2 papers in Q1 journals. Lisette Britz published 3 papers. 4 more are under review, and she's working on 4 more papers. And Lina Soros Emilson got tenure. If you want similar results, if you want to publish in top Scopus-Indexed journals, then you can get the whole Publish Researcher system for free, and the link is right in the description.